I'm Sudhir Pandey. I again welcome you to Ahmedabad University. We are a research-based university and we believe in a different kind of education. And we believe that education is not only in the classroom, but it is outside classroom. And this is one of the another platform where we believe that you can interact with deep thinkers directly and you can be aware about the topic. You get to know different things because discourse makes a man perfect. So I welcome you today. Uh, there are certain admin rules that I would like to just say quickly. Throughout the conversation, both the speakers, they will be on their video and audio will be on and they'll be talking to each other. And in the meanwhile, we all will be muted for an hour. And then at the end of the conversation, somewhere around 5:10, then I would take your question and you can put all your questions in the everybody chat box and we'll be taking your question and curating it, and at the end of the conversation we'll take an address. So these are some rules. Until that time you'll be muted if required, and if you agree we would also love to call you on camera and ask the question directly. Otherwise one of us can take up your questions and we can put it up to both the speakers. So I am really happy today and thrilled to welcome Shri Arun Maira to Ahmedabad University and to the conversation series. Arun Maira worked with Tata Group for 25 years and was the CEO of Innovation Association in the USA. And he was also the chairperson of the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, in India. He served as a member of Planning Commission of India from 2009 to 2014. Uh, One of the distinctive features of Shri Arun Maira that I really admire is that he not only reflects on the issues around him, but he also writes about it. I have read one or two books, and he's written about every topic that actually bothers him. That is very real quality that he has. He shares his knowledge, and he also has a very unusual combination of experience as a hands-on leader, a consultant to leaders, and a thought leader on leadership and institutional transformation in the private, public, and social sectors. Presently, he is the chairman of HelpAge International and an advisory to several civil society networks. So we are very happy to have you, Shri Arun Maira, to Ahmedabad University, and welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Sudhir. Thank you very much.
With Shri Arun Maira, the person who will be in conversation with him is Professor Jeemol Unni. Before joining Ahmedabad University, she was the director of Indian Institute of Rural Management, IRMA Anand, and she was also RBI Chair Professor of Economics at IRMA. She is currently a member of the Standing Committee on Economic Statistics constituted by the Government of India. She holds a PhD and postdoctoral fellow at Economic Growth Center, Yale University. She was an international labor organization consultant and senior advisor to the National Commission for Enterprises in the unorganized sector. And we all know her scholarship and contribution to the labor economics area. So thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. And I request you to take this conversation forward.
So good afternoon, everyone, and wishing everyone happy Onam and a happy Raksha Bandhan for tomorrow. And very happy to have Mr. Maira here with us. So we will, I'll try to, leave more space for Arunji to speak because I think we're all interested in listening to him. So to start the ball rolling, Arunji, you led 3 rounds of participatory and comprehensive scenario building for the future of India. In 1999, it was with the Confederation of Indian Industry. In 2005, it was with the World Economic Forum. And in 2011, with the Planning Commission. So we'd like to know what was the difference in the way these exercises were conducted by these very different organizations with a very different focus. And was the scenario building different due to differing socioeconomic conditions that prevailed during that time?
Thank you so much, Professor Unni. You know, you are such an illustrious professor in the subjects that I have become so engaged with that I'm feeling like it's like could be a viva voce examination, and I hope I will pass the test. But I'm going to, therefore, to make myself more comfortable, call you Jeemolji, like you kindly called me, Arun. Thank you so much. You asked about these 3 exercises in thinking of the future of India. The first in 2000, the second was in 2007, and the third was while I was in the Planning Commission in 2013. The first exercise was different from the other two and different from any other exercise, or hardly any exercise in the world had been done in that way before, an exercise of planning the future of a country. In that, firstly, it was citizens who cared. It was not an official requirement that a plan be made. It was citizens who cared for what was going on in the country and who felt that even though the growth rates, I'm talking of 2000, had been rising for the previous 10 years because of our liberalization, somehow the well-being of all citizens was not improving. So there seemed to be a disconnect between the policies of growth and the measurements of, let's say, considered the well-being of a society, but it was just GDP growth, and the actual well-being of citizens. And I noticed when I came back to India in 2000, that the country had developed very surely in the sense of physical goods. There were different models of cars on the road with air conditioners. When I had left India in 1989, there were just the Fiats and the Ambassadors, and they didn't have air conditioners, and one had to drive around in the hot summer or muggy days with the windows down, and one would stop in traffic lights. There were then, and there was congestion, and beggars would be around the cars, and they would put their hands into the cars and say, geez, and they needed something. And so you had to touch them to push them out or put something in their hand. And now I found when I came back, because we had, advanced, and there were more people with cars, and there were air-conditioned modern cars of various brands, that people like myself were just driving around and quite comfortable inside our cars, reading our paper maybe, or talking to each other. And when the car would stop at a traffic light, there was a new sound in India that I began to hear, which was a knocking on car windows. I never heard it before. It was these beggars outside who wanted to attract our attention, to say, you are comfortable, but please look at me. And we didn't have to touch them. We could even ignore them, turn the volume of our sound system higher. So we were getting out of touch with people in our own country, while we were the people inside the growth bandwagon progressing. So it was in that spirit that many people had noticed this. I wasn't the only one. They said, can we just step back and think about what is fundamentally wrong in the way we are thinking about a society's well-being and growth? And so how do we do it? So the second thing that was very different to a usual process of planning was that we didn't start with numbers, and you're familiar with that as an academic, say, first get me the numbers, the so-called evidence, and then we'll see what we can read into it. But here it was, let's listen to diverse people in the country. Let's listen to their perspectives. Let's go outside the group of people like ourselves to people who are not like ourselves, or people who usually we don't involve in any discussion like this, because we believe that we, as the well-off and the experts and the better educated, must find solutions for them. But we said, well, let's change it. Since we don't know, evidently, what is the real condition of the country, let's at least learn the condition by listening to these people. And then maybe with their ideas and our ideas combined, we'll have a different paradigm of development for India. So those were the two differences. One, a very diverse group of very different people, including very poor people. And I would say, since I noticed the polls, that there was so much interest in education and then employment as the highest factors, most important factors to change now. We had in those discussions, fortunately, because we located education and poverty as two crucial problems. And we had, the third was water, actually, the absence of depleting water resources around the country. And there was a fourth, fifth, and a sixth. So people who were affected by those conditions and who were knowledgeable about those conditions were called in. So we had many teachers who came, and principals of schools, of rich schools in metro cities and poor rural schools. And we had children who were supposed to be in education, like the orphan children in Delhi living outside the station of Paharganj, who were sort of being by some NGOs put into some government schools, to ask the experience of real people about the real thing, about education and its condition. And thus we had also about, farmers and others and women in rural areas talking about the situation of water, along with experts who knew something about water. And so this was the way that exercise was done. It was building a more robust picture of the system, combining many perspectives about the system and not jumping into the numbers yet. Because until you know what you want to measure and how you want to measure it, the number that you are going to use may be the wrong number and lead you to the wrong conclusions. So that was the spirit of that first exercise, in which the focus was very much to understand what was wrong about the present architecture of our processes of including people in the growth of the country. That led to some models of different models of how change is brought about in complex systems. And we didn't bother about trying to find numbers for how much growth would there be if you used one model of growth versus another model or not. In 2007, 2006, this is just after BRICS had been put into the global public imagination, that these four countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, were the future of the world. And this was at the World Economic Forum. Some really good strategic business leaders said, look, we don't believe economists. They keep making extrapolations and saying, this country is going to be the future. And like it was at the end of the 1980s, there was all this thing that Japan's century was going to be the next century. Japan was going to be the rising sun of the next century. Because yes, Japan had been overtaking all industries in the West. Japanese were buying properties in New York and California, and they were ruling the world. So it was going to be the Japanese century. The Soviet Union, yes, people were saying that it's been strong, but there inside there's some flaws. It might not keep growing. And no one mentioned China. No one mentioned China at all. Think back in 1989, 90, no one was talking about China in those days. So these business leaders in 2006-07 said, you economists tend to miss things like politics in countries, the things like the social mood of countries. You miss all those factors which influence, obviously, the economic growth of countries. So we would like you economists to please use another method, which is consider all the disciplines together, political, social, and economic together, and then say, what scenarios can you project of the futures of these four countries? And then we'll know which ones to invest in. Because we can invest in a country on the belief that, according to your extrapolations, there is going to be a large economic market. But political problems might make it collapse, like it happened to the Soviet Union. So the second set of scenarios was commissioned with a purpose to find the risks in the model of development, models of development of China, Russia, India, and Brazil. And that set of scenarios produced some very interesting pictures. Oh, by the way, in the first set of scenarios, as well as in the second, we said we will express our ideas, the scenarios that we develop, not just in numbers, but in pictures, because pictures are more compelling and a picture can say much more, as they say, than even 1,000 words. A simple picture can say that. So the second set of scenarios produced 3 pictures of what the future of India could be like. And they were saying this, that one picture, which was what they felt was India presently at that time, I'm talking about 2006 and 7, when India was shining. And they said India is, the society and economy of India are a Bolly world. They said it's got peacocks strutting around, showing off their finery, which never used to happen in the 1980s. People didn't show off their wealth. They were wealthy people. But you weren't admired because you were wealthy. You were admired because you were perhaps clever, good, philanthropic, helping society, not because you were wealthy and made so much for yourself. So he said, right now, the Indian paradigm is that wealthy people are becoming more and more admired, and we were noticing that. There were now these rankings of the richest people in India and how much wealth they had and how they were climbing up the global rankings and the share values of the largest corporations in India and how they compared with those in the rest of the world. So it was the wealth of corporations and the wealth of people that was the peacocks strutting around now and saying, here we are, the wealth creators, and follow us. At the same time, they said that we do notice there are lots of, like we said, poor people around. They're like little sparrows who've been waiting for the grain that has been strewn into the courtyard because of opening up the courtyard with opportunities, which is what the liberalization was about, the grain. But the bigger peacocks are bigger, so they grab the opportunities and they keep grabbing opportunities, and the peacocks, sparrows are waiting for, when will you be satisfied? When will you leave us some space also to grow ourselves? So this picture of Bollywood, they said, and they pointed out that there was violence developing in India because there was a reaction to these wrong model of growth. There was the Naxalite movements around the country, communist, leftist movements, violence. And even in cities, one was noticing more violence. So they said there's a picture of wealth and violence in India, which is like a good Bollywood movie. Bada maja aata hai, huh? Dances hote hain, people wearing fancy clothes, and there are people who then kill each other. But all has a happy ending because you're outside watching something. And they said, and these are foreign people, that we are just pointing out to you that you are like a Bollywood movie, we call it a Bollywood. It's good fun for us to watch, but how does it feel to be inside that movie? How is this movie going to end? And so that was the second one. The third one was when I was in the planning commission that I joined in 2009. And the Prime Minister had said, and this is after the World Economic Forum exercises, that our method of planning is faulty. Our method of economic planning is faulty, but we have to keep doing it because that's what we're set up to do. And our economic thinking is like that also. But could you, since I'm an outsider, I was an outsider, and with my previous experience, just while you're doing your official job of helping to develop industry and also urbanization, and Pankaj was so helpful to us in the plans we were developing with, fresh thinking on how should industry grow in a country like ourselves. So he said, well, you do your official work, but on the side, please delve into why is our planning failing. So halfway through our plan period, it became clear that we were doing same, and our plan document was going to look like same. It's just the same size, same words, except maybe some different numbers in it. That's all. So then there was a real sort of panic to say, quickly, let's do that scenario exercise that you had done previously. And let's see what that then shows. So Jeemol, the numbers were perhaps different, in all the three scenarios, because times had changed a little bit, but the insights into what was going wrong and what needed to be done to make it right turned out to be the same. They turned out to be exactly the same. The second two sets of scenarios, the one for the World Economic Forum and the one for the Planning Commission, had insisted that, no, you have to prove that these models that are coming will grow economies. Of course, because unless it is good for the economy, it can't be good for the people. So also the first one with the one with the World Economic Forum and the one in the Planning Commission, we had economic research groups. In both cases, NCAER used their models to convert our models of the system put them into their models, computer models, and to tell us what the effect of the different alternatives would be on the growth rates. And the World Economic Forum had done the same with both NCAR and the Oxford Research Group, who also got, computer modeling methodologies. And in both cases, it was found that the approach that had appeared in the first exercise in 2000 without numbers, and which appeared again in the second and the third exercise as the right approach for India, would increase the growth of the country, the GDP of the country, by 3 to 4 percentage points higher than the other two approaches. What the absolute growth levels would be would depend on what the global conditions are, because that would, dampen everybody's growth around the world. So if the growth would be, let's say, 6%, depending on global conditions, with the method that we were applying, the theory in use, if we changed it to the new one, we'd have 8 or 9% growth under any situation. So it was a delta which would explain the difference in the methods. And so that is what the insights that we did get.
Thanks a lot for those really very graphic kind of visualization of the development of thinking, actually, of what how the economy was moving at that point in time. And I think your question, if you pose it as a question, is what is good for the economy also good for the people? I think that is something which has bothered you quite a lot. And as we can see, you have written several books and it's mostly about the expectations of what about the future shape that India and its economy and policy will take. So how are your expectations different in your latest book, that is The Billion Fireflies, Critical Conversations to Shape a New Post-Pandemic World? Do you think inclusiveness, social well-being, sustainability of growth are greater concerns now after this pandemic thing that we've seen pan out?
They should be. They absolutely should be. Because the first few weeks of the pandemic with the lockdown here in India, we realized that there were so many people who were not in the bus, as it were. Yes, we shut down. And there are many people who couldn't be in the safe places that we had built for ourselves. Yeah, we could be in our homes and we had the facilities to stay locked down. Of course, we said we are getting cabin fever and missing the parties outside, whatever. But at least we could live. But within 2 or 3 days, so many people had to break out of the miserable places in which they were living because they couldn't live there. They didn't have water to drink if they stayed inside their house. They had to go out and earn something to pay for food if they had to eat for 2 or 3 days, in 2 or 3 days' time. And so they were, migrants broke out and started walking around the country, escaping from the model of development that we had created, which was very good for us. Yes, and we were all celebrating the greater good of the growth of the country and so on for so many years. But what about the people who had helped build this growth? These were the workers. These are the people who built our own houses. These are the people who continue to come and serve us in our houses. And where were they living? How were they living? How were they earning? It suddenly became clear that they were in a miserable condition. Their lives weren't resilient. And so something had to change. So I remember in the first few weeks, there were so many webinars and conversations and WhatsApp groups to saying, oh no, we must never let this happen again. Now, the economists had been saying such a thing from the 2008 financial crisis that, we don't know how to explain why suddenly we were surprised by this financial crisis. And we don't know now what would be a solution to create a more resilient global system. So they're talking about a new normal, the discovery of a new normal since 2008. And we're talking now here about the 2020. So 12 years, how had the ideas of economics changed? And I say the core economic ideas had hardly changed. But in the first month or so, many people, including our own policymakers, some of them, sort of switched off the official things. So I'm just talking off the record. We can't carry on like this. Okay, fine. So we had these conversations. I was very hopeful. That something different would come out of the pandemic. That yes, I hope we would very well manage the virus and its effect on people, but we'd also change the structures of our economy to make it more inclusive and a more resilient system for everybody after that. But I got pretty alarmed when since last February, actually, when we talked about the budget was coming up, all the people saying, are we going to start investing in social welfare? No, we can't afford to because we'll get something wrong and the inflation will go up. The same old economic thinking being applied. And so where is the concern for the well-being of the people who've been so affected by the model of the economy, which you're now still trying to use to guide a policy? So I felt compelled to write this book, to say, look, these are the things that you have been saying during this pandemic that you would find new solutions for. And look what you're talking today. You're still talking the same as we have been for the last 30 years. Economics has hardly changed, but the world requires a different solution. And to just give you a very nice, again, image, which I find quite easy to explain what has to change in economics. We were like India, a big country, many people traveling together in a big bus. And in the bus, there were a driver in the front, of course, who was controlling the steering wheel, and he had a couple of instruments to tell him how the bus was doing. And just behind the driver were sitting the important people who need to be comfortable in the bus in the first class section, and who tap the driver occasionally on the shoulder and said, Abhi, slow down a bit, turn left or right. They're in conversation, able to have conversation. And inside the bus, there were, let me say, a second class behind inside the bus, in which there were many more people. But they were all in the bus. And gradually, as the bus was moving faster and the bus was also being changed, the people in the first class had more luxury seats, greater safety equipment. They were being served Swiss cheese and French wine while they were traveling. The people in the second class behind were sitting there, and they could also get food inside their bus, but it was, on trays, and it was packed, and it was something. Then this bus hit a roadblock. It hit a bump in the road, which was the COVID pandemic. Said bus stopped immediately, economy stopped. And then what did we find? Were people falling off the bus onto the road. They had been clinging onto this bus, sitting on the roof in the sun, but we weren't aware that they were also traveling with us in this bus. And so what were we thinking about? How were we directing this bus? There were these two instruments on the bus, as I said. One of them was a GDP meter, which the driver was being urged to press the accelerator to make the GDP meter go higher and higher. I mean, 3 trillion, 5 trillion, why not 10 trillion? Come on, man. And the other was a stock market meter. It's like an RPM meter, which also, when the driver maybe didn't himself pay so much attention, but the people behind the driver were very interested in that, because their outcomes depended on that one, really, to say stock market is going up, good, progress is fine. Also get the economy going, press both, get them both up. Okay, that's the way we were guiding the growth of our economy, measuring its health by how the stock market is doing, and measuring its health by how large the GDP is, how much the GDP is growing. But like I said, the people were not benefiting. In fact, they had fallen off the bus, the gravy train of growth, and we weren't even aware of it because we weren't listening to what's outside, to the people who were not in the cocoons in which we were. And so what has to change is, we can't measure progress by just economic growth. Well-being includes many other factors. And the movements of change in the world that economists are now involved with, which I've got involved with more and more, are suggesting a new scorecard based on human well-being. And to find out what is human well-being, you've got to ask the people, what matters to you? And you will find that what matters to them are things like their dignity. What number do you put onto dignity? I want to be respected. I want to be socially included. Yes, I may be poor, but give me respect. Okay, so other factors must be put onto the scorecard of well-being. And one will show that if one links it up in a systems view, those factors of social well-being that I'm now pointing out to actually help the economic growth, which is what economists miss. But they think, first, let's grow the pie, and then we might have enough to distribute it, pieces of the pie. That's a wrong view. The growth of the people themselves, they're pulling themselves up with your assistance, will grow the pie. We're not waiting for you to grow the pie and then be charitable and distribute pieces of it to them afterwards. They are the means of growing the pie. And therefore, the answers about education and employment being the factors which our poll said people believe are the most important is so. It is so. And India missed this. China grew very well because China, while it was a communist country in all those years, had public education for everybody, had public health in its own way for everybody. So its human assets were much larger. Its human assets were much larger than were our Indian human assets when we went into liberalization.
Thank you. So let's come to what we think is the policies with regard to getting there, what you're talking about, the social well-being part of it. So in one of your articles in the Indian Express, you had written that trade policy must be linked to foreign policy, and foreign policy must be linked to industrial policy, and to complete the circle, trade policy must be linked to industrial policy. So, that's actually spoken like a true economist, though you're trying to prove that you're not an economist. So, where do you think we are now? Do we even have any of these policies in place? And to what extent are these linked? And who plans actually? And who decides that the nation prospers who decides that these people are sitting on top of the bus, as you are, your graphic representation is telling us?
Jeemol, you are an eminent economist, and I'm glad to hear that, that I knew that you had been also advising the ILO. Economics itself is such a divided profession. You got trade economists, and you got labor economists, and you have sort of the financial system economists. And, each of them thinks that their part of the economy is the most important part. You fix it, everything else will be all right. So talking about, let's say, the trade economists and the industrial and the labor economists, the trade economists, and this is where India got it, I think, quite wrong. We gave them so much prominence. And if I might say, after the Mody government came into power with the Professor Bhagwati and Panagraya, who wrote the book about the Gujarat model, and they are trade economists, the two of them. Amartya Sen and Jan Rez, who are also great economists, who these two persons criticized and said, their model of the economy, which maybe the previous government seemed to be more aligned towards, was wrong. And their whole theory was these two things. One, first grow the pie before you can do public welfare, right? Whereas Jean Drèze and Amartya Sen, unless you have health and education, you will not be able to grow your economy. The second was this whole idea about globalization. The globalization means boundarylessness, means let everything flow left and right all over the place. And somehow, by some invisible hand, everybody be all right all over the world. This is the theory of the invisible hand and the foundation of the last school of economics of the last century, which has been fundamentally wrong. Firstly, human beings are not rationally self-interested persons. Human beings care for others. We care for our families. We care for people poorer than us. We have compassion. We are not rational and self-interested only. Then you start with a false premise, and then you say, let everybody be self-interested. Let there be selfishness. And by some competition amongst these guys, some invisible hand is going to make everybody all right. I mean, logically, how can this be? If you're asking people to look after themselves and grow themselves only, then if they do have the power over the system to grab resources for their own growth, they will grab the resources for their own growth. So they'll start commandeering more and more of the natural resources around. They will start commandeering more of the political space around, influencing the political space to say, well, these are the rules that should be made for the sake of the economy. So this theory of no borders, it is first flawed. I'm a physicist. In terms of the physics models of the system, that you do need to have some other model to make all parts of the system equitably growing. Because unless they equitably grow, the whole system becomes unhealthy. And the second, importantly, is that we've got democracy, firstly. Every government elected must be responsible to a set of citizens within the borders of that country. And even if a government is not elected, a government is required to be responsive, accountable for the condition of the citizens within the boundary that the government governs. So the Chinese government is very concerned about the citizens of China. And mind you, because I was in the planning commission, we wanted to know, how come the Chinese government survives so long, and at the same time, it is also producing growth and improvement of the health, education, and jobs for people in China, which the Soviet Union did not do. Why? We found they were great listeners. We found, with the help of the World Bank, the processes they have in place to ensure that all their functionaries in the cities and in the ministries are being tested by how the people are responding to the plans. And this is not by voting and making them. It's but like a good scientist. I've done this. Has it worked? And worked for whom? Worked for the people. The GDP turns out to be a measure of outcome of this method, but are the people happy? If they are not, the government will fall. And they know that. They've been through a revolution, a violent one, when people weren't happy with their governance. So we in India must understand that we have to respect the needs of Indian citizens. It's our moral duty as the government, and it's our moral duty as advisors to the government to say, please respect the needs of your citizens, and they may be different to the needs of citizens in an already advanced country like the United States. So your model of development and the policies that you would need for the well-being of your citizens could be very different to the policies that America needs today. I mean, they are in a very different situation. And if we, because of the breaking down of the barriers in sort of in global institutions, the ideas of the Washington Consensus, which was the big thing in my time, are going to be required to prevail over us here in India. And those ideas are good for them. They are not good for the people of India. What is good for the people of India is we need to grow our industries. We need to create employment in productive industries. So we need, let me say, an industrial policy. The word industrial policy had been declared taboo by the Washington Consensus. You might remember this. The word industrial policy had been declared taboo because industrial policy meant that a government would be doing something proactively, actively to build its industries in its own country. And that, they said, is wrong. You shouldn't be building industries in your own country. Let anybody who can build an industry build it wherever. Let Americans keep producing things that they can produce for, and you buy it from them. Let people all over the world be consumers, and let a few people who have commandeered all the resources and the finance be the producers for the rest of them. And this model has come out now in Facebook and so on, these big guys, Amazon. I mean, they've commandeered even the networks, and thus who benefits from that? One is, of course, monetary, very clearly Jeff Bezos and the owners of these companies are wealthy, and they are able to influence policies in our country also because they have the wealth to do it. And we do need those ideas, but we need to change those ideas, adapt them to our conditions. So industrial policy cannot be isolated from trade policy. And you talk about foreign policy. When I was in the Planning Commission, our present foreign minister, who was then ambassador to China, he requested a meeting of the Security Council here in India. And I remember I was there, and he especially wanted me to come and so not to miss that meeting. He said, and this is in closed doors at the time, but now he said it later, so I'll repeat it. He said, India is becoming a colony of China. He said, you know, if a country is selling its natural resources to another country and buying finished goods from them, which is what happened between India and Britain, the same thing is happening between India and China. Well, what that will do is continue to give them greater, both financial and technological power, and then military power, as is the situation that has happened. So he was very alarmed that our views about industrial policy were being overrun by these ideas of open trade and don't look after national interests. He said, you have to look after national interests, and your national interests are building industries in your own country. Otherwise, strategically, you'll be very vulnerable, as we are.
Right. So as you were saying, policies, not just in India, all over the world have focused on the growth of GDP. And India has never really focused on employment as an objective of our planning and etc. So in one of the Indian Express articles, you had written this very clearly, actually, that the success of India's industrial policy must be measured by the number and spread of jobs. Now, how do you propose India should go about doing that, given the fact that we really have this really huge share of informal and self-employed people? And do you think that this whole idea of capitalism and growth, the way it is being talked about, should evolve to ensure employment and welfare of the people?
Absolutely. See, we're talking about national interest. So what should be the national strategy to win in the competition with other countries? Now, I am from the corporate world. I was a consultant to strategies to large corporations around the world. And always we'd say, what is your strategic advantage? Build on your strategic advantage. Now, if you have more of some resource than other countries have, then develop your technologies and your methods to use more of that resource, because you'll always find that cheaper for yourself than others would. So if Saudi Arabia has more petroleum underground, then Saudi Arabia should be developing technologies and companies that use petroleum resources, as they have done. And SABEC and others are great international corporations because they are commandeering a resource that Saudi Arabia has more control over. So the technology of Saudi Arabia would be one which is oil-based and stuff and so on. Now, what is the resource that India has more of than any other country in the world? It is young people. So if I have to develop a strategy and technologies, they should be based on the use of more young people, because I will not run out of this competitive advantage in a hurry. China is already running out of that resource. So our models of industry, our models of production must be based on the use of more people, not on the use of more capital. We are capital scarce. Yes. So in the philosophy that, oh, unless there's capital, you can't grow, which is a very core idea in economics. What capital? There's human capital also. It's not just financial capital. All right. And of course, we're realizing there's environmental capital too. And if you run out of water even and land, you can run out of growth, right? So all these capitals must be considered together, and whichever capital you have more of, base your development strategies, your competitive strategies on that capital. Our industrial models must be based on the use of more people. But here, I flow on yours. You said as you are an advisor to the ILO, and so have I been telling them. And they are very clear about telling industry that, look, people are your only appreciating assets. They are not a cost. Please don't show people on the profit and loss side to be adjusted. Whenever you're hard times, you throw out some people. And then when you come to good times, you scramble to get skilled, trained people, and you find they're not there. People are the only assets that you have. Your buildings don't learn and grow. Your machines don't learn and grow. It's only the people who they're motivated to and provided the conditions for, they can improve their own skills and abilities. And by improving their own skills and abilities, they will also improve the productivity of the machines around themselves and the space around themselves, the materials around themselves, as the Japanese did through their method of total quality management. The essence of the Japanese growth model was people are the only appreciating assets that any enterprise has. So it is for the country, and so it must be for every employer. So this is for the large enterprises. They must change their outlook about where their competitive advantage in India lies. Asking the government to make it easy to hire and fire is not going to help them in the long run. It might help them 1 year, 2 years, but they'll run out of steam, they'll run out of assets in a while to compete internationally. And the informal sector is the sector that builds itself because it doesn't have capital. It finds innovative ways of using people as its assets, as its resources. But what do we do from the policy perspective? We make it hard for informal enterprises. We think they're ugly, they're dirty, there's something wrong with them. Actually, they are the solution. And we must have policies to enable them to have their people have more training, have more learning, to have more social security, because the small enterprises can't afford that social security because they are always operating on the margin in terms of P&L. So that is where social security has to be provided to all informal sector workers, all people maybe, but certainly all informal sector workers, in which I'm including the women who come and work in our houses. They are workers. They are earning under very hard circumstances, waking up early, cooking food for their families, then leaving to work for so many hours, helping us to live comfortably. Where is their social security? One day we decide, oh, I don't like you, I can't afford you anymore, stay away. What happens? What happens? So this model, this informal sector of employment, which is various forms, the rediwalas, the people who are out on the street, they're entrepreneurs. No one is giving them a place to operate. And in Gujarat, Seva has been such a lovely model of women entrepreneurs. And they made themselves into a union, Ila Ben's model, to say, we will demand our rights to live and work. And they're not asking for bakshish, but make it legal for us to be able to work, provide us a dignified space to work, and don't keep throwing us out and us having to bribe people because we are selling on the street, it's illegal. See, the cost of doing business for these small people is much higher than the people who we ask, the big chaps. Let's make it easy for you to do business. And in making it easy for them to do business, we make it very hard for other people to live, their workers to live, small enterprises to live. So we need to look at ease of living. That's where well-being comes in again.
You basically taken the words and thoughts out of my my thinking, actually. I'm absolutely for small enterprises, informal enterprises, and what can one do for them? They don't even get a space at the table for policy. So suppose the creation of employment is a difficult option, particularly given our good employment, given our levels of education and so on. So actually, employment and education go together, and given the power structures that we have. So do you think this concept of universal basic income will become necessary? There's a lot of, sort of people talking about universal basic income. India itself has tried some target, projects here and there with regard to this. And do you think it is a feasible option in the long run? It really looked like we need something like a basic universal basic income when we saw this story about the migrants during the pandemic. So what are your thoughts on that?
This idea of a universal basic income, as you know, has been around for about 7, 8, 10 years, and became, louder with the people in Silicon Valley who are realizing that the artificial intelligence is sort of killing workers, and they worry then all the things that machines are going to make, who's going to buy them? Who's going to buy them? So then they say, okay, give the people income so they can buy the lovely stuff that our automated factories are going to produce, because their business has to keep running after all. But where's the money going to come to pay those people their incomes? Oh, well, the government will have to pay them. These people are not going to pay them. I mean, the business model is you can't pay the people who are buying from you. So the government has to pay them. But the government better not tax us, because, then we'll have no incentive to invest in our business. So the governments are caught in a jam that the business people and economists realize the need for universal basic incomes, but the means are not provided to the government to do it, because you can't tax the wealthy people, you can't tax corporations, and they find legal ways to avoid it, to do that. So the governments are caught in this jam, like our government is. So I think there's a flaw in this model here, and this comes from another point, and this is where I come to Gandhiji. We've got this concept of a circular economy, which we apply to the physical world. We say, like plastic, it's a very good invention. Plastic, it enables you to keep things hygienic. It enables you to conveniently carry things around. It's very light. And it's a very useful thing. But unless the plastic which is produced by these new technologies and has created big industries keeps changing its form after it's used and circulates back in the material system gets choked. And if any resource keeps accumulating in one part of a circular economy, the rest of the economy becomes unhealthy. So plastic choking up streams, plastic choking up oceans is killing, well, the little animals in the water and in the oceans. And so the whole ecology has got disrupted. So there's a big drive against plastics, and they must be part of a circular physical economy. But I think Gandhiji's idea was about wealth. It's about the circulation of wealth in the economy. So here the model of our economy is, and capitalist business corporations are the engines of growth of a capitalist economy. A capitalist corporation, Dhanda's duty is to look after the interests of its investors. Yeah, as Milton Friedman said, the business of business must be only business. But the question is, what is that business? The business is to make more money for your investors. Pay attention to their needs. And this is coming back to the idea of selfishness. Keep paying attention to the interests of your investors, and everybody's doing the same, and the world will be all right. But it's the investors' interests that are being looked after. So let's look at the model of a corporation. There are workers, maybe in India, who are hired until they're fired, and they're producing something with their work, and that work is done efficiently. They're made to do it efficiently, and whatever they produce is sold. So there's a margin. That margin, after paying them their wage, that margin goes into the hands of the investors. It contributes to their wealth. So their wealth keeps increasing. So it's not surprising that through the last 30 years, the wealth of those who had wealth with which they could make more wealth has been increasing than those who were at work. Because the people at work could not accumulate any wealth. They were being treated as a cost resource. So all the time adjusting the wages to suit the productivity of this so-called resource. So the wealthy have become wealthier, and that is Piketty's analysis, that the financialization of the economy has resulted in the great inequalities. And the wealthiest people in the world today, the 25 wealthiest, earn as much as the bottom 3 billion people of the world and so on. I mean, Oxfam has got its numbers, but they're so vulgar. In our country, of course, we've got the greatest disparity between the few wealth owners and the wealth owned by the median people and the average persons in this country. So how does this happen? Because as I said, the wealth that is created, the wealth is actually created by the activities of the people who do the work. But the wealth is then captured by this model in the hands of those who made the investment, and it's up to them to do what they want to do with it. Okay. Now, some of them will reinvest that wealth in further production activities, means in Main Street, hardcore manufacturing activities. But some others will say, no, that's risky stuff. Let's invest it in another retailing venture or some app or some financial venture. So you keep it in the financial economy and get returns out of it. So our venture capitalists are so much investing in other financial vehicles and so breaking it up in these new devices, Sparks and so on. That's become the innovation of how to keep the wealth to make more wealth in the financial economy. So wealth is getting choked up in one part of the system, is not circulating back to showering on the people there. So trickle down, which is the theory of economics, that the trickle down has stopped. It is just pulling up. It's pulling up and accumulating more and more up there. Philanthropy can hardly solve this problem, because philanthropy means, some people keep, and then gradually they give it, invest it back in something. It's a very small part of the total amount of, several trillion, 100 trillions, all the wealth up there. And the CSR is a joke. You ask corporations to, take 2% of their profit. But how did you make the 100% of your profit? And that 100% of your profit was made out of your entire income. So your profit, 2% of your profit turns out to be, 0.2% of your revenues. The revenues are made by activities. The activities of using people, the activities of using the resources of the environment, and so on. So how did you make your business? What is your business? How is your business conducted is the key question. Not what do you do with the wealth after you have made it. It's how the wealth is made. So in Gandhiji's model, I'm using Gandhiji as a code word here, but of course Schumacher, many others, and I just pointed out even our Olida Ben, Muhammad Yunus, many people, and in Spain too, have been working for years on the cooperative enterprise model, where the workers are the owners of the enterprise. So any surplus that's created by their work, that wealth is in their hands. Now they can choose to invest it either in education of their child or invest it in, or pull it back and put it into further growth for that particular enterprise. But that's how they get agency. That's how they get agency. They're not being ruled by the rules created by people who are making rules to suit the growth of their own wealth. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I muted myself.
Yeah.
So one last question before, before talking to you, I listened to some of your conversations on YouTube. There are quite a lot in other fora. And there was this discussion in one of them as to whether our country and you personally are a capitalist or a socialist. So is this kind of a discussion? I don't know. Is it even relevant?
Totally irrelevant, you see. One, as I say, who is a capitalist and who is a socialist? So Gandhiji, for example, declared himself always to be, in the words he used, a capitalist, because he said, like I said, I want every person to own their own means of production. You own your own charkha, you do what you have to, and there'll be a small something that you produce, and so on. Be a capitalist. So his vision of the world was, India would be a country of, let me call them capitalists, but they all have agency, and therefore it'd be a genuinely democratic country that they can control the rules of the game in their own community, and then, totaling it up to the country as a whole. He didn't like communism, because communism as a theory said that, it's government of the people, by the people, but it wasn't by the people, it was then by some intellectual experts and theocrats up there, and the bureaucracies that they build around themselves. So in that way, the capitalist economies of the West and the Soviet economy were basically the same model. The power was not with the people. The power was in the hands of the people who control the wealth. In one case, it is private individuals. In other cases, the state. But in the case of the Soviet Union, again, the state ran factories in which the workers worked, and they were being monitored by using the best theories of Taylorism, as was the West. All of them saying, how to get the most out of these workers. We'll pay them fairly, hopefully, and they shouldn't form unions because then, there'll be a problem. They'll disrupt the production system. And so both sides, the same model. And Gandhi didn't like that. And I'm saying, so we need models where the people, workers get their power because they are the owners. And I say that, yes, until people have enough power individually, they must be encouraged to aggregate themselves. The poor must be encouraged, enabled to form unions, I'm calling it, because that is how the small pieces of power are collectively able to prevail against the concentrated power of the state and the concentrated power in a few owners or capitalists' hands. So what I dislike about the reforms in our labor codes today is mostly this idea that the suppression of the rights of people to associate with others and to represent their collective interests. So one I'm saying is, let people own their enterprises more and more, some models of cooperative ownership and cooperative management. But until then, let people please have the right to democratically associate with others to represent their interests against the powers that are. That's democracy.
All right. Thank you so much for this very fascinating discussion. And, if we come to the labor codes, then we'll just have to have another session on that and what it has done to workers' rights and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a whole literature out there, actually. So I think I'll, Subir, can you come on and take up the questions that we are seeing in the chat box and otherwise?
Yes, thank you so much. This was such a kind of captivating talk. And I mean, we can go on and on, but there are several questions that we have received during the conversation, and people are keen to ask. So I would like to invite Professor Dinesh Awasthi to come on camera and ask his question.
Hi, Mr. Maira, how are you?
How are you, Dinesh? What a pleasure to see you.
Place is mine. Well, very, very interesting talk as usual. See, when you say we must strategically use our workforce youth as a means for prosperity. Now, my problem starts, what kind of youth do we have? A very large number which is uneducated, without any skills, unemployable. You need people who could be used in IT industry or computer related industries, and people do not have those skills at all. There is a mismatch between the skills and the kind of opportunities which we have. Now, when we talk of the skills even, look at the basic education. We have never bothered about it. If you look at report of Pratham, people who have fifth class can't pass, can't read even or do some of class 2 or 3. I mean, this kind of people we have, how do we use this so-called youth power in our production? This is a bit intriguing to me.
Yeah, Dinesh, thank you. I've used this method of systems thinking, and therefore then understanding from systems thinking, what are the opportunities and the flaws within the present model. So this question about how does India create more employment, I was invited by the CII, or Prime Minister Mody had requested CII to please, we need some fresh thinking on this, because the point you made was there, that you see, the only industries that seem to be growing in India are the service industries, IT industries. They seem to require people with a certain set of skills and so on, but they're not enough. They are not large enough. And what is the future of these industries in the bigger schemes of things also? At the same time, as Mr. Mody keeps saying, and he's so right, look, people need clothes, people need food, people need, material things around them like houses. So this is not service industry. You got to build things also. You got to make things. And so who's going to make these things? Are we going to keep importing these things from elsewhere? why can't we have industries that make these things? Huh? So look at the opportunities for youth to be employed broadly. And so we said, let's use systems thinking. And I would say this with pride, that this was already about 7 years ago, 5 years ago. And we said at that time, once again, looking at the education system of this country is not working. The health system is not working. There's so many signs of it. And so can our people be the resources to be working in new models of healthcare, in new models of education? And could education therefore be reoriented towards enabling people to earn while they learn, and not that you do very expensive investments in education so that you can then earn afterwards, which is our present model of education, is so much that you better be well qualified, because what the industry expects of you is that level. So the private industry, when it's come into education, is yes, we're providing loans to people to get education. So they go into management schools and stuff with high loans, and then they must get a job at a high salary so that they can repay the loan. The companies that can pay a high salary are these large formal companies. So we are perpetuating what I'm calling a very difficult model for people who don't have resources to begin to join the economy. So we come to change the model of education itself, to start saying, unless people can earn easily in whatever condition they are, and unless they can learn very easily in whatever condition they are, they will not be learning well, and they won't be earning enough. So learning and earning, how can you make it happen at the same time, and not, earning happens after you learn. So based on this, there's some very interesting scenarios and solutions that were produced, which I could share separately. It's a long explanation. We talked about a different model of learning, a different model of learning. It's a modular learning and learning to learn. So this is, I found, very helpful when I'm, been with management institutions in particular. So we've got to change our model of what we teach more ethics, teach people skills that will be useful to them, not just for the next 3-4 years, because who knows, the industry might change in 3-4 years. How do people learn to learn? How do they learn to learn? So what is the pedagogy of learning to learn? And in that, I must say, the lovely words I've been hearing now from people who built some of our finest institutions in India, Ashoka University and the ISB, and so on. They're saying, what they realize is that we need to understand andragogy. Andragogy is how adults learn. And the difficulty in adults learning is they must first unlearn all the great things that they have learned, which they keep applying to solve the problem. Whereas, as Einstein said, if you keep using the same methods that have created the problem to try and solve the problem, you're mad. And so this is the situation in which we are, that we've got to look at the economy and education and people's lives as an integrated whole, You can't separate the economics of education from the economics of living in the condition of the system. So change our model. And if you change the model, then we are finding, like the Delhi schools, government schools, and I'm very pleased with the way they're rethinking and changing from the bottom up. They've got a whole curriculum from the bottom that we want children to be good learners and good citizens, and damn it, if they're not good engineers, they will become good engineers, and they do. And the people who've going through this system of education in Delhi, and this is true elsewhere in the world, they've done it, they are able to then acquire whatever they need to acquire just in time and just when they need it, because they're very good learners. And today, with the modular ways that knowledge can be made available, whenever you need something, you could get it then. So task aligned and just in time learning as a mode, and not just in case learning, which is what our present education system is based on. Learn it, you might need it, but the world changes and you don't need it.
Thank you so much, Shri Maira. And what you said exactly what we do at Ahmedabad University. So we have a foundation program, which is actually meant for on learning. And there we teach these kinds of things, democracy, justice, and ethics and all. And we believe in this kind of interdisciplinary. So what you said actually resonates with what we do. So thank you so much for saying this. Professor Awasthi, any comment that you have, you would love to?
I'll get in touch with him separately, because it is a debate and this is not a platform for debate.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, next question is from Ravi. Ravi is from Georgetown University and he's doing MBA there. and he was very keen to ask a question and to meet you. So Ravi, can you unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Myra, sir, for this amazing talk. Sir, I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, and I'm in an MBA program over here. And in one of the courses over here, I realized that India is going wrong in many places, like be it policy making, be it business, as you said, all the three policy cycles. So, like, since India is such a big country now, we have 1.4 billion people. How can we as a country change now further if we want to improve our well-being, improve our growth, because we don't have any example country in front of us. China was a communist country, we are a democratic country, so we have all the problems of democracy as well. So like, what would be your initial point of change? Is it the new education policy that would do the thing, or is it only the business or the society as a whole?
Yeah, Ravi, since you are deeply into the academic field, I'm going to give my answer also in an academic way to you. And my answer is going to be about the ways we think. It's about the paradigm of our knowledge, epistemology, actually. And there are two things here I would say. One is that, as you talked about, like best practices, can China suit us, would the US suit us, and so on. There are these two professors in the Kennedy School who wrote a book called Thinking in Time. And this was, I was urged to read this book by, when I was in the US consulting, by some Indian civil servant who was at the Kennedy School for a program. And I was sort of boasting about, how industry knows and we do, and expertise and so on. And he said, please read this book, Thinking in Time. And the lesson of this book, Thinking in Time, was this, that all complex systems development is always path dependent. Your history will determine what can happen at the next stage. Yeah, you can't suddenly start with a clean sheet of paper, whether it's a human life or it's the life of a society. Can't be just, clean everything out and then dump an idea onto it. And people have tried it by, eliminating the population and bringing something in. But again, that they find nothing grows there. It's already, you kill the roots there. So it has to be that you have to look at your own situation and say, what is the reality here? So as in systems thinking, one of the most greatest insights, Donella Meadows at the Club of Rome time, and she put it out. Club of Rome was, talking to the world that the present paradigm of growth is unsustainable. We're running out of resources for the whole of humanity. And if we keep carrying on the way we are, and this at some years, we'll run out of it. But no one paid attention because the gravy train was growing. Of course, now in the 5-6 years, we've suddenly become alarmed that yes, we are running out of resources, the amount of space available in the atmosphere to keep dumping our carbon is just used up. So we are running out of space, running out of resources to do that. So she said, every system is perfectly designed to produce the results it is presently producing. So if things are not seeming right, please look at the construct of the system as it is. And that has to then be the starting point of the changes you make. So first understand conditions as they are and find within your conditions what must change, and find then, if you can, the best practice only for that condition. And even when you get that best practice, because you're going to have to fit it within many other things around yourself, you'll have to adapt it. So you can't wholesale import solutions, large solutions. And the development paradigm, unfortunately, has been that let's take, like you're saying, development model of China, the development model of Japan. You can't take things and aggregate like that. It's very small things, which are the few things that you feel that you need to improve in for improving the state of your system. Find out who does these things very well. And these things, when you bring them, adjust them to apply them to your own system. So that's one thing to do with this. Now, the other one, now in your question, it was, I'm reminding myself, I got carried away with the thinking in time. Tell me again, because the other part I had to say first.
Yeah, so I was like, will the new education policy, will that be a starting
Yes,
point if that is
right,
the case? Yeah.
right. So we've got here the SDGs. The SDGs describe the world must improve education, everybody, universal education. It's one of the SDGs. We've got health as another SDG. We've got some for the environment. Yeah, the condition of the oceans, the condition of green cover, water. We've got some to do with, housing also for everybody. We've got some to do with the economic side, inequalities and stuff. So we've got these 16 problems which are everywhere in the world. It's not that India has only one problem, India has all of them. It's not again in the US has only one problem, US probably has all 16 of them, or at least 13, 14 of them. Everybody has these problems, but these problems combine in unique ways in countries. So the shape of the system in which inequalities are rising, in which the environment is deteriorating, in which public health is not good enough, is different in China than when it is in India, and it's different in the United States. So I can't take a whole model for the solution. And to the point, I can't take the education solution of the United States and apply it in India, because the education solution must fit the economic situation and the infrastructure situation of India. So it comes back to the point that I was making to Dr. Avasti earlier, that you see, you got to think of all things together, and experts in education cannot solve the education problem alone. And so present model of theory of governing a large system has been that you break problems into parts and get experts on the parts, and those experts on the parts will find policies for their parts. But the policies for their parts do not fit the policies required for other parts, and the whole system doesn't work. And people on the ground resist it. They say, this is not helping. So they have different ways of resisting it. One is they'll take your money and do something else with it, then you say it's corruption. Or another way is they won't implement it. So the problem in India is people don't, implement things. But there's a reason, and there's a good, sensible reason, that they don't take top-down solutions from experts. So what do we have to do as experts? And this is where my work with the Global Solutions Initiative, which applies advising G20 now, is this. We need a different model for improving all the things that the world needs to improve in. We need local system solutions, collaboratively found by communities, to solve these global systemic problems. And the roles of people up there are to help people with the solutions that they feel they might need for some part of their problem. Please don't force your solution. And philanthropists, unfortunately, because they have the money and because they built up empires, and therefore they must be smart, tell you, this is your solution for education. I'm giving you a large amount of money. Now you put in a school with these designs. Or like we say in the sanitation program, I know sanitation is required everywhere. So some experts design a good sanitation system, and then you say, well, here are the toilet designs, or 4 or 5 different designs possibly, that will be used all over the country. And we're giving you money, but provided you use these toilets, and we'll shame you if you don't do it. So you make it even worse. There's nudges people into doing things which actually are bad for the system and bad for their well-being also.
Yeah, true, sir. Yeah, really, that was really insightful. I mean, I'm glad I woke up at 6 a.m. here in the US for this talk. Yeah, thank you for your time, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you so much. The next question is by one of our MA Economics student, Ayush. So, Ayush, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, sir, definitely. Thank you very much.
Yes, please go.
So my question is from a political angle. Actually, when I see democracy, I believe that people need to know who they are so that they choose better leaders. Because as we know that how Hitler used identity politics after World War I to gain the majority. And I still remember when Mr. Lalu Prasad Yadav was in Bihar, many people used to attach themselves with Lalu Prasad Yadav for gaining their power. So what I concluded that we gain or derive our power from institutions and political leaders and even fictions like caste and all these things. So, of course, institutions and all these political, philosophical things matter a lot in economics. I mean, for institutions, whether it is extractive or inclusive is very much required for an economy. So my question is that, sir, how can we actually make people attain this awareness, this identity, so that they identify themselves with development, and not rather something like caste or fictional things like, I mean, there are a lot of fictional things. So how can we actually make people to identify themselves with development and growth, and not these things which actually make us bigot?
Ayush, I will say a little bit about economics, then I'll come to your question about people and development. You mentioned identity.
Yeah.
I found it rather amusing that it's only 10 years ago that economists admitted that there's something called identity which affects economy. So somebody who happened to have already won a Nobel Prize gets great recognition because he writes a book on identity economics. It's only when the economists admit that something is important is it supposed to be important. But the fact that people's identities matter to them has been known for thousands and thousands of years. Yes, always it's been known. It matters to you. It's who you are, who you believe you are. And our identities are formed by the social system of which we are a part. Yes, it's not an isolated thing. I can't be who I am unless I am with something, and I derive the sort of categories which describe my identity from the things of which I am a part. Yeah, so I'm a Japanese, I work with Mitsubishi, I'm a man, I'm poor, rich. So my identity is formed by the things that I belong to, that I'm a part of. So this is where I come to, that to start thinking of systems and thinking of the social side of systems, which is what we're talking about now, is something that economists, and I would say all scientists, were missing. The physical sciences certainly thought that if you can identify particles and understand the composition of that particle better and better, you can then explain how the world works. That's my discipline, physics. Smaller and smaller things. If I get it, then somehow I'll understand how the universe was formed and how it works. But we say, okay, maybe theoretically, yes, but practical reality, as you know, is people, they care about themselves, they care about respect, they care about who we are. And don't please look down upon us because we are better than you are. And so we start with this identity competition and identity in economics. Let me put it that way. Emotional intelligence began to be recognized by economists when? That their emotions, my goodness, it's not just rationality. For God's sake, novels have been written, Kalidas wrote his poems, and so on. We know people have emotions. How is it that this discipline shut all these things out? It shut them out because it could not measure these things. These are soft, intangible things. And unless something is measurable and quantifiable and put into an equation, it is not scientific. In fact, Lucas, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, said that unless you can compute on a computer your theory, it is not a good theory. But to compute it on the computer, you need to be able to quantify all the variables. And then you make approximations and say, well, this must be that, and you put that quantity in. So garbage in, garbage out. And worse than that, there's something which seems totally unquantifiable, and they are externalities, emotions, identities. These are externalities. So this is the fundamental flaw in the way economists have been advancing their science, which physicists have woken up to 100 years ago when Einstein relativity and Heisenberg uncertainty say there are things we cannot know. There's some things which are beyond the human mind and science, human science to know. And so let's wake up and be humble as we get to this. Now, talking about development, and this is where I come to very much, who decides what is development? And this whole colonialism, if I might say, and I'm using the word colonial firstly in the political sense, that, it is a sort of responsibility to make these natives in this country developed. And so, yes, we had the white people coming to India of different sorts to say, look at these guys, they are not developed. By the way, we were economically, perhaps if you looked at economics in terms of the skills we had, the things we were producing, and the volumes in which we were producing them, economically pretty well developed. But they couldn't then extract that value from our economy. So they created these economic models. As I said, the East India Company is a corporate model where the wealth creators accumulators in Britain, who are the investors, would have the rights to take the profits howsoever they were made. And initially, the British Crown was helping that company because it gave it a charter. So these people were being protected in the exploitation that they were doing. But even the British Crown was then justifying this, let me call it exploitation, by saying, but we're helping these people to develop. We are putting education into them, going back to Professor Vasti's question. And the education was for what? To giving people long training so they can be employed in our models of how work is done. The bureaucracy or maybe some industry, hardly that though, and so this idea, what is development? Who is being developed? And so then we come to human well-being. If the whole purpose of development is every human being must, as Gandhiji said, have full political freedom, full social freedom, and full economic freedom, all three freedoms, then only is a human being totally free. We've got so-called political freedom by saying one vote to everybody, man, woman, rich or poor, which India had earlier than every country of the world, even much earlier than the United States. We had it. So he gave that form of political freedom. But like we discussed in the earlier question about labor rights, that by itself doesn't give you full political freedom. You need other things in addition to support you, if you also have the right as an individual to vote, to get, political salience. So that is how Lalu Prasad and others, they said, well, let's around identity, let's all group our votes to get greater power for our identity. I mean, that's why you collectively as a party say, each will vote individually, but let's all vote the same way for the sake of this. And it's to rectify a historical wrong. There can be no doubt that certain communities in our country have been oppressed by a set of social rules, which said for the sake of the efficiency of the, let me say, the production system, certain people should be doing a certain type of work, others do another type of work. Some are merchants and some are experts and Brahmins, and some are the rulers of excessive power, and some are the people who do the real work, the dirty work. And so, yes, it makes the society stable, but people are there in their place. They don't have the freedom to break out of. And the power then, as we know, is with the people with the knowledge and with the political power, which is, let me use just a shorthand, the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins. And of course, when we get into the world where we say the merchants, the capitalism must rule the world, and today we do find that the Banyas and others, I'm talking the Western Banyas too, I mean, they are now even higher perhaps than the political people and the Brahmins, because they now fund their work. They fund their work. So that's how capitalists began to rule all of them. And the workers at the bottom, poor chaps, they are being told by the Brahmins and the power people, this is development good for them. But actually the development is really good for the people who are funding the ideas and who are really influencing the rules. So I am being, and people may say now, oh, I'm talking like a communist, but I want to remind you that we've used the word communism in a way which, as Gandhiji pointed out, is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about looking after the interests of everybody. And for that, we need to have a social and a community spirit. So in Gandhiji's way, the community spirit was not communism. It was a spirit of caring for everyone around you. And of course, for policymakers and for the rich people, the principle of Anantodaya, when you're thinking of a great solution, how can you prove it will directly affect the life of the person who's the most deprived, social freedom, political freedom, or economic freedom? Don't say to trickle down somehow. Get your model right and show me how it is going to do that. Which is why I explained that I find universal basic income will not solve the basic problem of inequality of power. Universal basic wealth, a system which enables more people to grow wealth by their own means fairly, is going to be a system which will create equality.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this insight.
Thank you to both of you. Now we have, sir, we are nearing the time, which is 5:30. And looking at the questions, I would request 10 minutes extra of your time.
Sure.
I hope that would be okay. Okay, thank you so much. Now we have Kopal, who is one of our PhD students, and she would like to ask a question. Kopal?
Yeah, thank you very much, sir, for the very, very insightful and very interesting conversation. I could not pick out one thing, because my interest area is into sustainable consumption. So when we look in India, where there is a huge divide between income groups and between the enterprises, like a huge corporates and the small enterprises. How do we talk about sustainable consumption when sustaining consumption is such a prime importance?
Yeah.
Your comments now.
Yes, we have been for many years, economists and politicians describing India as an aspirational society. And when they put the images of what people are aspiring for, and especially the youth, they would put out, and they still do, but they were doing it so much more to say, look, our youth aspire to have a smartphone. Our youth aspire to wear Gucci pumps or something. Our youth aspire to wear Nike something. It is all about material consumption that, if you have aspiring youth for material consumption, you are going to be a great economy. Yes, so, because yes, you'll be a market for many more things. And this is where the flaw came. But unless people earn, how are they going to buy these things? So we had the steam in this model of liberalization. We opened it up. And yes, our citizens were excited. We could, at long last, get access to new phones and new shoes and a variety of things which we couldn't previously. So we were pandering to the consumption side of human beings. But the citizen side means I want to be able to stand on my own feet. And for that, they need to earn, they need incomes, they need respect, they need to be able to have power in how society is being run. So when you talk about aspirations, people have aspirations for respect, for their identity, have aspirations to have more power in how the rules are being framed. So when I talk about an aspirational society as India was, our aspiration in 1947 was to be creating the all-round development of the country. Coming to the environment, again, unless we care for the environment, we will not be sustaining ourselves as we are realizing. Now, if we have a model which says, use the environment as a resource, then you got the wrong model. Your environment is the mother, as they say, right? If you don't look after your mother when you're a child, you won't be looked after. So your relationship is different. It's not a resource to be exploited. And technology, unfortunately, has this siren song that with technology, we can solve every problem. So if we are running out of water, we will create water. Yes. And then we find that the thing that we need to create the water, they run out in turn. Right. And then we say Elon Musk has been saying quite publicly that, well, we'll create rockets and we'll go to Mars and maybe we'll find water. So we'll go and create another civilization there. And I can imagine that the people of the civilization there, if they are wise, they're going to be saying, these chaps, please don't have these rapacious guys come over here. They'll destroy whatever civilization we have. And who can go? Who can afford these technological solutions? Who can afford them? So we need to have these frugal solutions, frugal innovations, which are mindful of the condition of other people and condition of the mother environment that gives us birth and that is sustaining us. So it's a different way of thinking of how we find solutions and what sort of solutions will work. There's an ethics in this. It's not it's ethics.
May I add another point, question here? Do you think that social enterprises, as you were saying, that we need a bottom-up approach? So do you think social enterprises could be an agent for sustainable consumption and inclusive society, where people in the enterprises, the social enterprises generally, and corporate enterprises, they are the people who are consuming as well as producing, and they work towards a different kind of model. So do you think that could, as a business model or as a model, can work for sustainable consumption?
This social enterprises is like communism and socialism, a word on capitalism, a word that needs to be unpacked. So I have working last few years mostly with young people and older people who are wanting to do good and creating enterprises, their own enterprise models and business models to help the poorer people earn more livelihoods, help poorer people get better education, look after the health of poorer people, and of course, water resources, environmental resources, and so on. So these are social enterprises, okay? These are social enterprises because their purpose is to improve society and improve the environment. The purpose is that. Now we come into the capitalist world has also started putting this word social enterprises around itself. But what is their definition of a social enterprise? The people who come from the stock market side, that it's an enterprise in which you put your money, and your money, of course, will be returning money and profit to you, but the things it will be doing will be sort of good things. It will be doing, let me say, some education. But the purpose of you investing in that enterprise is twofold. Yeah, it's to return your money back and to make some profit in it, perhaps also in the process doing some good in the area of education or somewhere else. And this is where the conflict in purposes comes out, because how do you measure then the performance of this enterprise? From the investor's point of view, there must be some return. So how high should that return be? If an enterprise just gives you your money back and just services the cost of administering the giving and returning of the money, is it a good social enterprise? In the stock market world, as they're now comparing social enterprises, no. You must also compare them by which ones, while they're doing good, will also make more money. And that's where the conflict comes. You remember the micro-lending enterprise in India, which blew up. Yeah. Because it decided to do great work, it needs to tap the capital markets, people with good hearts. And then they invested in it, but they began to measure how this enterprise was doing. And they said, well, you could actually make more surpluses. And with more surpluses, of course, as they said, you'd perhaps be able to invest more in the work. But to make those greater surpluses, the model you used was to start squeezing out the people who can't pay immediately. Yeah. So go after the loans rather vigorously. Well, that's efficiency, and it's fair also. They took the loan. So why should they not pay out? So in that process, what happened was that the people got upset, and the Andhra government had to close down all this micro lending to say, we're going to rethink this whole model. And it got, because the infection of these ideas from the capitalist world, that the health of an enterprise has to be measured primarily by its economic health. So when I find people in enterprises talking of the enterprise's sustainability, they talk of the enterprise's sustainability. I said, hey, so therefore you're measuring how large your enterprise is, how efficient it is, how much surplus it produces for itself. That's the enterprise's health and sustainability. But what about the health of the environment and the cause that you took up? Where are the metrics of that? And we don't know how to measure those very well. We will know how to measure those starting our discussion today. What is well-being? What is well-being? And therefore, I was quite interested in the answer that came out of the question, that people felt that perhaps our present models of economy are also solving the problem of well-being. Have we thought about well-being from a holistic perspective? Have we thought about well-being from the perspective of those who are not part of, included in the rules of the game of the present system? Then we'll see that our present model is not improving well-being. So we come to Muhammad Yunus, who's been built some good models, who said the 3 zeros. He said, yes, we need to have money, and the people who are stakeholders in the enterprise because they're given money must get a fair deal. But what is a fair deal? Greed cannot be a fair thing. So you better stop at a certain point. And same for consumption, to your point. How much is enough? And I say, no. And we had this case recently of the chief executive of one of our nicest companies in the country, who institutional investors in a nice way have said, no, we will not allow this chief executive who's turned around this company to continue, because his salary has been, board is proposing to increase his salary by another 2 or 3 crores. He's already getting 23 crores. I mean, how much is enough? And these are institutional investors saying the median salaries of people in the company are, his salary is 350 times that of the median. How much do you need for the good work that you do?
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your time. Can't be more thankful. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite one of my colleagues, Professor Jeemol Unni. He has several questions, so I told him that you may decide which one to ask. So Professor Jeemol.
Hello, sir. Good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, Amol, I seem to have seen you somewhere.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
That's.
You got a famous look, perhaps.
No, not at all. Anyway, sir, it was a very interesting conversation, and I was so glued to it. You covered a whole lot of ground, but what we are also seeing is, you spoke about people as assets, and what we are also seeing is that there's this conflict though it's not a new conflict, it's been going on between technology and people, right? We are all talking about replacing people with technology and so on and so forth. So how do we really work around this sort of a conflict between people and technology, which is perhaps with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all of that, is perhaps going to intensify going forward? We'll be all, I mean, you spent several years in consulting, several decades rather. It'll be great if you could share some insights on your experiences in the consulting world. And my final question is that if you could, you've also, covered a fair bit of authors and writers, from Kalidas to Gandhi to, I don't know, I'm missing more names, Friedman, some very interesting sort of contrarian choices. So could you suggest some for us to read to make sense of this 21st century? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And your question is, as was mentioned already, there are many questions in that, and I'm going to be as sharp as I can. Firstly, assets. I want to add the word, the only appreciating assets that any enterprise has is the human beings. The only appreciating assets that any nation has are its human citizens. The appreciation is the word. Appreciating means their value appreciates. Others depreciate over time. And the human beings can increase their value if they are inspired to learn and continue to learn. What makes a human being continue to learn is curiosity. Curiosity. So you ask me about what I read and stuff. I'm just curious about why things are as they are and why they could not be different. And so, like we said, just looking within one discipline which seems to have a problem, you will not find the problem within. It will be what that discipline is missing about the world around itself. So you must read a variety of things to be able to understand any one thing. And this is where I said the Enlightenment sciences, the European Enlightenment sciences, have been going the wrong way, breaking knowledge into parts, and then you have PhDs who know more and more about less and less, and who then is able to put the whole together. So we collectively, as human beings, can make sense of the whole, each of us, by listening to other human beings who have other ideas, disciplines. So I'm really curious about reading about the great thinkers of the past and the present in different disciplines. And I would say, I'm so impressed during this pandemic to be invited by young people who created their own learning forums in India, who meet once a week or sometimes once a month and have deep introspection about what they are seeing in the world. And they are all active in social enterprises in the world. But what they are, got the questions in their mind, and they ask each other, what have you seen? What have you read? And I pick up things to read from the conversations of these young people. They are great learners. And this is what gives me great hope for our country, that there are young people who are taking responsibility for their own learning to solve problems which they believe are the problems of other people around themselves, the problems of, like I said, the environment and the community around themselves. It's a caring for the health of the whole system and not just health, and then managing your own learning to find new answers, because the old answers have created this problem. So this is my belief. Your learning must be managed around 3 tracks. One track is, yes, it is always in action, because there's no point just being a theoretician. Then what good is that to the world? Okay, but you learn while in action. So Gandhiji's autobiography is called The Theory of My Experiments with Truth. He was the greatest political actor the world has seen. It was always about doing something. And he experimented, and something didn't work, he'd stop it and do something else. But yes, he had some principles. That one is the outcome must be good for everybody. So that's the vision of the outcome. And he had a vision of the method also. It has to be a non-violent method, causing no harm to people during the process of producing goodness for everybody, which seems hard, because sometimes you say there's something evil, then you have to knock it off with some violence. But he said, yes, that is the present method that we know. But can we find another? This is a scientific method of change in which this is also not necessary. So he was there. The third thing I say for young people, that you can't do it by yourself. We all know this. You got to be in partnership with others. Partnership in others, one is because each of us is a small amount of resource, but partnership with others also because they're different knowledge. And this comes to the SDGs. Experts better be partners with others also. So we need 3 agendas to be managed together. One is our agenda for action to get results, which are going to be good for everybody. Second is to manage my own learning and to stimulate the learning of us together, an agenda of how are we going to be better learners individually and together. And the third is an agenda of collaboration. Who should I include in my learning? And this is where I come to the discipline of listening to people not like ourselves. Unless I listen to somebody who is not like me, I'll never get a new idea. I keep listening to the same sort of people, same experts, and we keep sort of moving the deck chairs on the Titanic if the Titanic is going the wrong way. And to do that. So I've got to look for people outside the Titanic who say, hey, your ship is going to hit something. I can see it from here. And say, okay, you jump on the ship with me and help me to understand how to change the course. So listen to people not like ourselves. And we've got barriers to this. One of them is that we don't like certain people because they are another religion or something else, another ideology. So we stay within our ideologies. The second is they're another discipline. Economists will not listen to sociologists. They will not listen to historians, etc. And the third comes very much to the inability to hear in the modern world, because our social media is just forcing us into algorithms, and therefore come to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is nothing other than algorithms. But how are those algorithms derived? They, of course, machines, by checking against data and doing experiments, will take certain algorithms which turn out to be better. But there are some master algorithms. How do you choose between algorithms? What is the ethics? What is a better algorithm for better outcomes? And this is where, even now, as all the books I'm reading about artificial intelligence say, and you say I read a lot, yes, I do, about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, as people say, is not intelligence. It's just sharper, smarter calculations. And intelligence is not wisdom, as we know. Wisdom is what's the right thing to do and who benefits from it. And this is missing in technology altogether. We can create nuclear technology, but who has the wisdom to not use it for harm and to use it only for good? Yes, the powers that control nuclear technology and preventing other countries from using it, they are the only country that has ever used the nuclear bomb against civilian populations. And yet they will prevent us, India, from having it, because we are not wise people, you see. We can't be trusted. So I'm stopping at what might seem like a political statement, but this is the power structures that come out of technology, knowledge, and capital together, and with which we shape ideas about each other. Who is good and who is bad? Who is wise and who is not yet intelligent?
Thank you, sir. There are last set of couple of questions, and I would request you to just stay for 5 more minutes. There are a lot of questions around cooperative societies. So I thought, let me put all of them together. Idea is that how can we scale cooperative kind of system in a democratic way so that larger people benefit from this? And even in post-pandemic, we have seen that an organization like KVIC, Khadi and Village Board, they have made profit and people have benefited from it. So what prevents them to kind of become a kind of larger setup rather than in a very limited way? And how can we harness that energy and that kind of structure?
Well, this is now the learning agenda. And I would say for people who are talking about employment policy, industrial policy, economics, just take this one question, the question that you raised. What form of institution would be a form of institution that will create, as we said, agency, economic wealth, and so. And then how does this form of institution sit within the present frameworks of governance? And I'm into that, and I'm looking for people who are researching this, and there are many now, fortunately. It's a very rich subject. And you find how this idea of cooperatives is seen as to be not modern, you see. It doesn't scale up. What's the wealth it creates? When you say, but every woman who had a buffalo has become a little wealthier. Oh, no. But what's the valuation of this corporate? Is it as big as Amazon? I mean, is Amazon a better model? So we come to, again, our values and what we want to create at the end. So these come in the way of creating structures, institutions. Institutions are a combination of what we usually say about institutions, that there's some constitution, its roles, it's some sort of exercise of budgets and stuff like the planning commission or institution or the courts and so on. But institutions, as North said, the economist who got a Nobel Prize, is, well, their ideas, their beliefs, they are the ones that really actually shape then the structures that you create. So it's these informal and tacit ideas that then convert themselves into these concrete ideas. And then those concrete ideas become our constraints. So we have examples of enterprises that had grown, but then they were stymied because ideas from other institutions, other ideas began to take over. And I believe that Amul is suffering today because the idea of politics and all is invading that organization. So let me stop here because I might say something too much without knowing enough about it. But this is the subject for exploration. We need new models. We need new models for all-round well-being of all human beings, especially the poorest, and also for the well-being of the environment that sustains us.
Thank you, sir. And why do I believe in this? Because during COVID, these were the two models which really worked in India, and they actually benefited a lot of people. There is one curious last question by one of the students. He's saying that, do you think post-COVID, India should go into privatization? And
no, see, again, I go to see every institution is based on a certain set of rules. So a private business corporation is required by law to look after the interests of its investors first and maybe only. When Friedman says the business of business must be only business. Private corporations are very good at extracting profits, and they learn methods of efficiently doing so. Okay, but for the sake of whom? Well, their investors. Private institutions are not good at exercising the principle of equity. Okay, that if someone can't pay for something, why should a private enterprise give that person that thing? In fact, I've been on the boards of various very good corporations in India and been an advisor to many. As an independent director, like I was, I could get sued by the law if my advice to the corporation was going to harm the investors of the corporation. Yes, it's my fiduciary responsibility, it's the fiduciary responsibility of the board. So all the rules of the stock exchange and corporate law protect investors. And so we are in the world today where governments can be sued in international arbitration by private investors. And the government says, well, we are caring for the needs of our people and making laws for them. Oh, but those laws harmed our interests, these people say. So I'm saying, therefore, the thinking and the models of private enterprise are not suitable for certain enterprises. If you want to provide public goods equitably, the construct of a business corporation, a private business corporation, is not the right vehicle, the instrument to use for it.
thank you so much, sir, for explaining this so simply, and that too coming from you as kind of huge experience. Now I would request Professor Jeemol Unni to come and say if any other concluding remarks.
Thank you, Arun Maira ji. I mean, it was a joy actually speaking to you, and I mean the vast range of topics that we covered, and they went beyond the kind of simple questions that we were asking, including the simple questions that the staff and faculty and students were asking you. So I think it's been a very thought-provoking kind of talk, and thanks a lot. And we've taken a lot of your time today, and I think maybe in the preparation as well. Thank you so much. And we hope to meet you again, like Professor Chandra said, when you come into the campus, actually.
Thank you. You know, Jeemol, I must say the quality of the people in this discussion and the questions you've asked and the heart with which you've asked them really makes me feel that this country is in good hands. If it's going to be with people like yourself shaping the ideas with which we'll make the world better for everyone. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your generosity and giving us extra time and The best part was that you took, you took so complex question to such a simpler detail, and everybody was so convinced, and you made it so simple, and you explained everything to such an extent. So we are grateful to you for this, and we are also grateful to both of you for giving this opportunity. This is a very different time, but thank you so much to both of you, and thanks to everybody who joined today and asked such interesting questions that clarified every aspect of the social well-being part, which is really very important now, more so after post-COVID. So thank you so much, everybody. See you in the next conversation. By that time, take care and see you soon.